All right, we're here at part two, step-by-step guide to completing your VA claim. And you've done all the homework at this point, you've gotten your documents together, and we're gonna move to the dry paperwork part of it. But I want you to remember, nothing's perfect, no form is perfect. I'll cover the essentials, so I've got you. Let's jump in and look at the form, and we're gonna start with step one. All right, so this first step is optional. I begin here because this can set you up for success. If you register and get your own VA.gov account, you can save your work, come back to it later. You can monitor the progress of your claims. It's easier to upload documents, and it connects with your VA healthcare account. So down the road, you're going to be happy to be part of a VA.gov ecosystem and have your own registration. However, that's not absolutely essential for you to get started. And since this whole series is about your first VA claim, just keep that in the back of your mind. If you do decide to register with VA.gov, I recommend going through ID.me, like India Delta Doc Mike Echo. ID.me is a website that is approved by the federal government. It not only helps you prove who you are on all the government sites, but oh, by the way, if you use places like Lowe's or Home Depot, or you go to Six Flags or other vacation opportunities, they give you all kinds of great veteran discounts because they already know you're a veteran. So something to think about. If you want to learn more about ID.me, let me know in the comments below and I'll do a detailed video and explanation on that. So that's step one / optional. Register for VA.gov. Step two, fill out the form. It's a VA form 21-526EZ, like Echo Zulu. 21-526EZ. You can find this on a Google search. If you go to VA.gov, even if you haven't registered, you can download all these forms. So it's real simple. Make sure you have the most current form. The forms that you get from the website are going to be the correct ones. The ones you get from the global searches on the internet may be old, and I hate to have you go through all this work just to have your work kicked back. So first step, get the correct form. You got it? All right, so we're going to walk through the 21-526EZ. And what is that? That is the application for disability benefits. That is the core claim form for all the stuff. Any kind of additional claims down the road are going to come back to this key. So if you master this form, you're good to go. And if you're using a veteran service officer, they'll be glad that you're at least familiar with these questions that you're going to have to answer anyway. So it's time well spent. Let's walk through it. I'll break it down bit by bit. All right, everybody have their form in front of them, or they're on screen with a PDF filler. However you want to do it, it's the same form. First thing you want to do, now that you've done all your research like you did in the first video, part one, if you remember, is you have your information. So this is going to help you plug and play as we go. I'd like you to make sure that you have your private treatment records. So if you were to go on a patient portal or pull up forms that you already have from your doctor visits that have things like your diagnosis, your dates of diagnosis, your medication plans, those kinds of things, you're going to want that. Now we're going to go to the form. I'm going to walk you through it. On screen you'll see me pointing out the relevant blocks that you have to pay close attention to. And remember, if you can't get some of these documents, perfection is the enemy of progress. Go with what you have. The VA will reach out and try to get some of those government documents for you, anything federal, okay? If you have them, great. If not, don't let that be a barrier to you proceeding and filling out the form. All right, I'm going to bring up the form now, the 526EZ. What I'm displaying for you now is the form, section 1. Just above section 1, you'll see FTC program or standard claims process. Go ahead and click the standards claim process. The reason for that is it gives you options later on if you want to submit more evidence, like if you're going to return to your doctor for anything. So go ahead and click standard claim process, and then we'll move down to section 1, veterans identification information. Obviously use the name you used in service, whatever was on your DD-214. Your social security number is absolutely essential. And if you've never filed a claim before, which I'm assuming is in your case, click no. Don't worry about VA file number. That is normally your social security number minus the dashes, but it'll be assigned by the VA. Date of birth, self-explanatory, and telephone number is very important for getting contacted for CMP exams. We'll go into that later on. Go ahead and click the I agree to receive electronic correspondence so that they can email you and reach out as well. Okay, Next, section 2, change of address. There should be no reason you're using that. Wherever you are starting the claim process is generally the location where the VA is going to ask you to go to exams for the conditions that you claim. So we're going to go ahead and skip section 2, and we're going to move down to section 3. Section 3 is homeless information. So if you are indeed homeless or staying with someone, those questions give the VA a way to get a hold of you, since they're going to need to be communicating with you during this process. They also raise your priority in the VA so that because you're under duress, they'll try to get this claim done as expeditiously as possible. That's section 3. Now we get to the meat of it, the exposure information. We're on section 4. If you look at the top, block 15A, it says, are you claiming conditions related to toxic exposures? Remember that discussion we did earlier about presumptive conditions? This is where presumptive conditions live on this claim. So we're ready for this question. Sometimes there's a yes, sometimes there's a no. If any of your conditions have anything to do with exposure, click yes. Specifically, they're going to start with Gulf War. Then they're going to move down to the next block to see if you were exposed through Agent Orange or Vietnam. And then finally, they'll go down to like workplace or toxins from your military occupational specialty. In those cases, you're going to want to have a detailed statement because that remark section is not sufficient. Which brings us to section 5. Section 5 is the heart of the claim. The VA is so concerned with this that they actually gave you examples of disabilities. If you look at the instructions under section 5, they show an example of a hearing loss claim with noise exposure from heavy equipment operation and service. They give you an example date. So it's the symptoms or the diagnosis. The next column is how you were exposed and examples of how that disability relates to service with your best guess of a date. Obviously a surgery date's important, but if other things manifest over time, just do the best you can. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm going to provide some examples here. They're not perfect, but it kind of gives you an idea of how I fill these out on behalf of my clients. The first one is very common. It's hearing loss. 9 times out of 10, people would attribute their hearing loss to weapons noise. That could be anything from small arms qualification to heavy artillery to machinery to working around vehicles. In this case, I wrote artilleryman and I put an approximate date. I normally will use a month or a year or a year. Similar to that, if you're claiming hearing loss, chances are you are claiming tinnitus or tinnitus, as they like to say. Again, that goes hand in hand with hearing loss. So you're going to see me repeat the weapons noise exposure comment and artilleryman as how it occurred in service, how that noise was part of military service. I use the same month and year. Now we're going to go down to some of those other ways that we talked about that you can develop for service connection. And in this case, I'm using sinusitis, although I misspell it here for a moment. Sinusitis is a presumptive condition for Gulf War I and Gulf War II from the desert. So in that case, I'm writing in for exposure PACT Act. PACT Act is the law that made sinusitis, rhinitis, and other respiratory conditions presumptive. I write that in there if the VA knows what we're talking about. And I just explain it in plain English, service in Southwest Asia. And I think there's one more example that we'll go over here real quick just to give you an idea of the variety that can go into these claims. And finally, we're going to go with, survey says, lower spine degenerative disc disease. This is very common as we age. It accelerates for certain veterans who've had, let's say they served in the infantry or they did a lot of military occupational specialties that put undue stress on your skeletal system. That would be a direct claim, and that's why I put direct in the exposure column, or the reason column, if you will, column 2. You can also have things accelerated in service that were not your fault. For example, if you had a vehicle accident while you were on active duty and it wasn't your fault, you weren't drunk, you weren't out of the area without leave, that would still be considered in the line of duty. So that's why I wrote that comment, vehicle accident on active duty with 2007. So obviously there's a lot of art and science to how you can list your conditions, how those conditions occurred, what path to service connection is there. But this is the heart of the claim. Take your time with this. Read it out loud. If it makes sense to you, it'll make more sense to the VA. But those are some examples right there. And of course, Don't forget every page to put your social security number on top of the form. That's true of all VA forms. The last condition example I forgot to add on section 5 is a secondary condition. If you notice, I put radiculopathy secondary to the spinal degenerative disc disease. You can always do that at the same time you file your claim if you know a condition is related to another condition. And that's why I put that secondary under that second column. That's really important. We talked about that in video 1 if you need more detail about that. All right, so how you doing? You hanging with me so far? You've already gotten through the toughest part. We're going to finish this off, and you will now have your first disability claim filled out. So we are continuing down section 5. In this part, they are looking at your places that you were treated while you were either on active duty or for some reason you were treated by the VA. And sometimes that happens. You may come to this claim having been in VA healthcare for many years, but never did a disability claim. So we're going to list the VA medical centers and Department of Defense military treatment facilities where you receive treatment. You may not have these dates perfectly in mind. That's fine. Use an estimate. But if you can remember the name and the location, that's very, very important. And sometimes even names change, but location is key. So let's say you were at Fort Belvoir or Camp Lejeune or Langley Air Force Base. Cool. They know where to look. The VA knows where to pull records from because they're all in separate regions, or your input makes the archivist's job a lot easier when they reach out for those records. In this example, I'm using Langley Air Force Base Hospital. If you don't have the dates of treatment in column B, you can go to column C and just check the button that says, I don't have that date. That's perfectly acceptable. Here locally where I work, there's the Rock Hill VA Clinic. Your community-based outpatient clinics are called CBOC, CBOC, like Charlie Bravo Oscar Charlie, and those are your day-to-day clinics, not your hospitals. Those would be VAMCs, like a VA medical center. So once that information's there, then the VA will take your clues, your pointers in that section, and they will go out and pull all your electronic federal health records. So that's actually very helpful. Below this, you're going to find additional forms. So if you had claimed something for, let me back up. If your rating ends up being overall 30% or higher, you have a right to get paid a little extra compensation for having dependents. So that's what that part of the form tells you about, is the additional forms that complete the process. More common is mental health conditions. If you have a mental health condition, you'll have to do a VA form 21-0781. And that's a stressor statement. That tells the VA where a traumatic event occurred and they try to corroborate it. That's the purpose of that form. Now we're going to section 6, service information. Most of this is pretty easy if you've had nothing but active service. Where it gets a little bit murky is if you had any reserve component time or National Guard time. Now, a lot of those questions are hard to answer because your reserve or guard unit may have changed location or may have been disbanded altogether. And in that case, just do the best you can. I've helped clients out by just putting in the state, the tag number or recruiter's number, just a phone number, just to fill in the form so that they'll go ahead and process the claim. Don't get hung up on this stuff. So just do your best. That's all you can do in this section. It's not the best form in the world when it comes to reserve and component time. Perfect example of that is their question about your reserve obligation date. Well, if you were like me, it was all zeros on your DD-214, so don't sweat that part. Okay, move kind of quickly through section 6, but I want to clarify section 6. When it asks questions about active duty dates and reserve time, for example, Block 22A, are you currently activated on federal orders within the National Guard or Reserves, yes or no? You'll know whenever you've been activated on orders. Besides having experienced it, you will be issued a DD-214 that is very specific in the remarks section about month, day, year. They'll cover it from the very first day that you had active federal time, even though you were, let's say, a mobilized guardsman, to the last day of that active federal time. So that's the purpose of those questions, is to see if something happened on active duty. Now, it is true, if you were injured at any time, that includes the very first day you showed up for training, an injury or an illness that service connected does retroactively make all your time active time. So, but for filling out this form, it's your active duty DD-214 dates or your Title 10 mobilization dates in the remarks sections of a DD-214. So if you can get that information, you're good to go. Like I said, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. If you don't have all that info, just do the best you can. Clear as mud. Thanks. We're almost there. Hang in there. All right, coming up on Section 7, Service Pay. Now, this doesn't apply to most of our veterans unless you are military retired or you receive some type of separation pay or disability severance pay. So for most of you, you can ignore this form. However, if you're like me, if you're a retiree, you want to go ahead and answer that, yes, I am retired and I am receiving military retired pay and the monthly amount. The reason the VA asks for that monthly amount is they offset your VA compensation by that amount. If you are overall rated 50% or higher, then you get to keep both your retired pay in its entirety and you get to keep all of your VA compensation pay. Never simple with the federal government, but that's how that works. So if you have that information, make sure you fill that in. You don't want to get into an overpayment situation with the VA. And now the pièce de résistance. We are going to let the VA know how they can pay us. So that comes down to Section 8, direct deposit information. Remember I asked you to get that copy of a voided check or a bank slip, something with the bank letterhead on there, containing your routing number, your accounting number, and type of account. Here's where you fill that in. So in block 30, you're going to put your account number, whether it's checking or savings, your name of your financial institution, and in block 32, your routing number. And that's how they set up your direct deposit embedded within this claim form. You do not want to get into the check of the month club with the U.S. Treasury where your check is stolen or lost, because I've helped too many clients try to retrace those checks and it is a nightmare. So don't forget that little fact. A lot of people forget the voided check. Go ahead and just make a copy of the voided check and you'll make your life a whole lot easier. Trust me. And last but not least, you think this was fairly obvious, but people forget to sign these forms. So at the very bottom, Section 9, certification and signature, when you go down to the veteran applicant, go ahead and sign your name on there and date that. When you work with a veteran service officer like me, there are times that you may be tempted to have that VSO submit a claim for you. Well, by law, the claim has to be signed by you for your first claim. And any additional claims, let's say if it's a claim for an increase down the road, a condition gets worse, it's still in your best interest to sign your own claims. Whenever you sign your own claim, the VA does not send any additional letters to you asking essentially the same questions over again, like, hey, we got a claim signed by your VSO. Are you sure? So be on top of your claim, own your claim, sign your claim, even when you're working with someone else. So word to the wise.